Alright, I apologize. I got cut off there. I hit the wrong button, as I am wont to do. My thumb is too big for these buttons. But I did tell you that we would be coming back to Harwood. Something happened here on Harwood. So here we are on Harwood. This is still, as you can see, this is still the Dallas Police Department headquarters. That's the ramp right there we just left. We're just walking up here half a block to Harwood Street and get around to the front. Show you the front of the building here. Something happened here on Harwood in Maine. This is the turn in the motorcade route. So what happened was the president's motorcade came up Harwood here, which as you can see is a two-way street, and I'm going to try to run across here. Alright, so the motorcade coming from Love Field came up Harwood there and passed Dallas Police Headquarters, the city municipal building, came up to Main Street, which is this next street here, and made a left-hand turn. And of course, you remember the original motorcade route was supposed to go straight on Main all the way to the Stemmons Freeway. At the last minute, they changed and put in the 90-degree turn onto Houston and the 120-degree turn onto Elm. But let's talk about what happened right here at Harwood in Maine. All right. I told you this story the other day about the Secret Service and how there was a Secret Service agent who got wind of what was fixing to go down, and he was not going to go along with it. And he disappeared. On that day, he ran out of his office after the phone started ringing. The president had landed, was beginning the motorcade. His phone started ringing. He ran out of the office and he said, "This is it." And he ran out of the office, according to witnesses in the office. And then there was a situation that happened right here, where the motorcade turned left from Harwood onto Main, and that person just disappeared. And of course, this guy's name is Chuck Robertson. He disappeared. His family never saw him again. His wife never saw him again. His kids never saw him again. But his checks, his pay stubs, his paychecks still continue to be sent to his mailing address as if he was still alive. But he's disappeared. He's never been seen since. There was no media coverage of it. There's nothing. We learned about this story from Seth Cantor. According to Cantor, remember he's the the newspaper reporter that ran into Ruby at Parkland Hospital. Well, he's digging around, and at Parkland Hospital, a nurse asked a Western Union man about a report that a Secret Service agent had been killed on the street during the motorcade. The Western Union man replied, "Yes, that happened. It's true." So Seth Cantor, who hadn't heard anything about that, even though he was in the motorcade, but remember this happened, according to witnesses, the guy who approached the motorcade here in this very spot, right before they made this turn, approached the president's limo. The president's limo was virtually at the very front of the motorcade. There were a bunch of cars lined up going way back, and Seth Cantor was in one of the media cars way at the back. So he would not be in a position to know what happened here. He didn't find out about this until he got to Parkland Hospital a few years later. And of course, followed up and couldn't find any information about it. So the story sort of died. Well, a few years later, Jim Garrison, during the Clay Shaw trial in New Orleans, received a letter based on an article written by Penn Jones and Gary Shaw about this dead agent. And the letter's author said the following, quote, "A Mr. Richard Douglas Chuck Robertson, who was assistant director of the Dallas or Fort Worth Secret Service office, confided to a friend of the writer." So the person who's writing this said he heard it from a friend. So take it for what it's worth. Anyway, he said, confided to a friend of the writer who requested anonymity, so an anonymous friend, in 1963 that a plot to kill President Kennedy was planned, and he did not want any part of it. And so Jim Garrison, who hadn't heard anything about this either, starts looking into it. And the letter continues. It says, on November 22, my friend was in the office of Mr. Robertson. So he's obviously involved with the Secret Service. He was in the Secret Service office when all the phones began to ring. About the time Kennedy was arriving at Carswell Air Force Base in Fort Worth, Mr. Robertson then said, well, this is it, and left the office. Since that time, Mr. Robertson's family of 7 children and his wife have not seen or heard from him, yet his paychecks continue to be mailed to his home. So Jim Garrison gets this letter, and you'll see here in a second why we're at Harwood in Maine. I'm not just pulling this address out of my rear end here. And then in 77, so this is about 9-10 years later, 77, Penn Jones, Gary Shaw write an article and said that our 1965 investigation leads us to believe that a Secret Service agent named Chuck Robertson was in Dallas but was posing as a postal inspector. It was reported to us that he had left Dallas. We also learned from newsmen that something unusual happened on Harwood Street shortly before the turn onto Main Street. No one wanted credit for this, but we were told by reliable newsmen that a man jumped in front of Kennedy's car on Harwood Street shouting, quote, "Stop, I must tell you." The man, according to their report, was promptly wrestled to the ground and hustled away. All right? And there were no other victims that day that disappeared other than this Chuck Robertson. Everybody else was accounted for, including the victims in Dealey Plaza who were shot and killed or shot and wounded. But everyone was accounted for, except for one, this Secret Service agent. Mom never saw him again, wife never, kids, nobody saw him again. 7 kids. And what's the interesting factoid about Robertson? He knew about the plot in advance. It reminds me a lot about what happened to the driver of the motorcade, who would have been the driver, and he was eliminated 6 weeks before the assassination because they knew he wouldn't go along with the plot and replaced him with somebody who would. We're here as a Secret Service agent in the moment trying to stop it. We don't have evidence that it was him, but we sure have a lot of evidence that this guy was killed or disappeared. He's never appeared. He's never been seen since. So what happened to him? What happens to people who disappear? At some point, they're declared dead. How did he get dead? That morning, he was alive and well. The only thing that happened on this Harwood Street. They dragged this man off, and there's no record of a man being dragged off and taken to the police station or appearing somewhere else. He just disappeared into the ether. The Warren Commission, or the Warren Report, actually states in one of its volumes, quote, one of the Secret Service men on the field, and of course they list as the field, Elm in Houston, said it came over the teletype that one of the Secret Service men had been killed. All right. A U.S. Customs official in 1980 wrote a letter to Attorney General Benjamin Civiletti and dated it 1/17/80. So this guy's name is Joseph Forrester. So this story just kind of percolates along, and it gets reinserted into the narrative, and somebody else takes a renewed interest in it. And in 80, it was Joseph Forrester. Anyway, he writes this letter, and he says, quote, my interest in the Kennedy murder started in '66 when I met an Air Force Master Sergeant at St. Albans Naval Hospital in Queens, New York. This sergeant, an elderly man, was suffering from terminal cancer. He stated that on November 22, 1963, he was attached to Air Force One as an electronics technician. He further stated that after the president was shot, a message was received over a military frequency that multiple assassins had attacked the president. A secret, see, that was the initial word, multiple assassins. Then it got changed. A Secret Service agent, Mr. Chuck Robertson, stationed in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, disappeared on November 22, 1963, yet his family still receives his paychecks. The disappearance of an individual is not unusual, except it has been said that Mr. Robertson became aware of an assassin's plot against the president. An assassination plot had been unearthed in Chicago 20 days earlier before President Kennedy's Dallas trip. Please do not misconstrue this letter. I am not a crank. I am sincerely interested in this crucial investigation. I am willing to join to investigate an investigative team, and if that is not possible, will make myself available for an interview by investigative officers. So, what this looks like is that this is the second incarnation of Thomas Shipman. Thomas Shipman was the Secret Service driver who disappeared 6 weeks before. Secret Service hurried up and buried him. No autopsy, no toxicology. Said he died of a heart attack. He had no history of heart disease. It just passed a comprehensive physical exam. But the complicating thing for the Secret Service was the advance of the assassination trip to Dallas was they needed a compliant driver. They needed somebody who would hit the brakes, make sure the target was hit. And this guy had already said, no way will I ever hit the brakes. I'll get out of Dodge. He told his family that. And he'd been the driver for a long time. He was very good at his job. Probably found out the plot, just like Chuck Robertson, and they took him out. Now, at the time, it was just a big mystery, and maybe his family were prone to believe that it was a heart attack. But then in the 70s, when we found out that the CIA had learned how to kill people, make it look like they died of natural causes, they had a cancer gun, and one of the prominent tools of the trade was inducing a heart attack. If you want to get into the weeds on that, look into how J. Edgar Hoover died. Look into that. We have direct proof testimony of somebody who helped burglarize on behalf of the CIA J. Edgar Hoover's office and home, and they planted drugs that would induce a heart attack. And sure enough, a few days later, he died of a heart attack. So as the Thomas Shipman family learns all this, they start re-examining how their dad died, and they got very suspicious, right? Well, the same circumstances around this Chuck Robertson. What's the common theme? They both found out about the assassination plot. They both had to be dealt with, and they were. And so this whole event in this location where we're standing, you can just imagine the motorcade coming along up Harwood St, and it's going to turn right here at this intersection where you can see the light right there, and when they'll turn and left, just like that white truck that just went by, they'd follow down Main Street all the way to, now they're supposed to go straight to Stemmons, but they just continued on, or actually they turned right at Houston and then left on Elm, and you know the rest of that story. But right here, another Secret Service agent was taken out and disappeared because he had knowledge of the plot. So here is the building that's supposed to represent justice to the citizens of Dallas. It's a municipal building, it's headquarters of Dallas Police, and a Secret Service agent was taken out in front of that building. It was all hidden from the public. And then a witness to the assassination, probably the most important witness of all, Lee Harvey Oswald, was taken out a little bit past that guy in a white shirt at the ramp for the underground parking garage by Jack Ruby. And all within walking distance, or all within the footprint of the Dallas Police Department.